Hello, I'm Paul Bevan, and you're watching.
Just
Start again.
you were there. You were
I
there.
was, I forgot Cloud. I was going to go straight to the therapist channel. Like creepers. All right, okay, start.
That's my other channel, Paul.
And I need that as well. Yes,
And we all need that one.
yeah, right. Okay.
Hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel. I'm Richard Simon. Happy New Year to all my subscribers. I just wanted to say thank you for your continued support and hopefully continue to support the channel going into this year. So this is the Cloud State of Play for January 2023, the first one of the year. Again, I have the irrepressible Paul Bevan back with me again. So Paul is the Director of Research for Infrastructure at Bloor Research, and he's back in for more punishment for the year. So let's say hello to Paul. Hello, Paul. Hope you're well.
I'm well. Looking forward to the punishment, although that sounds a bit kinky. I think we have to be careful of that. But no, Happy New Year, Richard. Looking forward to it, as always, and lots of interesting topics to talk about this year, no doubt.
Indeed, yeah, indeed. So and talking about that, we're kind of going to be doing slightly sort of a special episode, it being sort of the beginning of the year. So we're going to be talking a little bit about our sort of projections for this year. So that's kind of peering into the future and kind of seeing what's going to be there. Now, unlike others you might have seen, so other sort of podcasts, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch of those kind of blogs and vlogs and whatever online on YouTube and various other places, LinkedIn especially seems to be quite guilty of that. Unlike them kind of doing predictions, we are going to be doing projections for the year. Now, viewers may want to actually look the difference up between those two particular words, predictions and projections. And there is a difference because predictions is kind of where you really are almost prophesizing, foretelling in advance something. So you're kind of sticking your neck out quite a distance in terms of what's going to happen in the year, and kind of being a little bit more sort of precise, and being more certain about it, and kind of having a sort of a forecasting of what things might what things might come. So that's kind of based on sort of probability modeling and various other things, if you're kind of really interested in the data. Whereas projections, we're really kind of looking at where the current trends may go in the future based on kind of existing data and existing information that we have, and allowing ourselves for a little bit more sort of changes in terms of the so-called boundary conditions of that. So we're kind of more scenario based around assumptions and things like that. That's the main difference. There's quite a lot of difference. Paul was noting earlier there's a lot of abuse of those particular terms, or misuse of those terms, and conflation of those two terms. But hopefully we will try to stick to our projections for this year. That's kind of really the idea for this particular episode, and try to avoid any predictions for the year. So, okay, so let's look at Paul's projections for the year. So I think he mentioned a couple to me earlier. So one is the growth of data and the impact of that on various things, including sort of infrastructure and processing and things like that. And then also he wanted to talk a little bit more about sort of edge computing and what's kind of the development in edge computing and so on. Now, for me, I had a number of other or particular topics that I wanted to look at. It's kind of the growth of public cloud for the year. It's kind of the projections for that. A few useful and interesting tech projections as well for the year. So one around GitOps, one around eBPF, and kind of one around sort of AI and ML in general. And then rounding that off with a kind of a quick discussion around sort of cloud optimization and what that would look like. So those are kind of the three areas, and we'll break those down a little bit more. So Paul, I think you want to kind of maybe kick off on your data and sort of the sort of your discussion around growth of data for this year.
Okay. Slightly interesting that, a research director for IT infrastructure is looking at data. And Bloor's been a data analyst company for many, many years. It built its reputation around data. But it's been quite obvious as we look, that the impact that data is having on infrastructure is quite significant. And I don't think anybody needs to be, convinced about the growth of data. I mean, the figures look crazy in terms of the data growth. We're talking about doubling the amount of data we hold every 2 to 3 years. Absolutely crazy. And you have to sort of draw these wonderful pictures of, if you put all the data CDs in a pile, how much they go to the moon and back 3 times, in terms of the amount of data we've got. So I think, it's we can project quite comfortably that data is going to grow. Why is it going to grow? Well, clearly things like IoT is having a huge impact. Just the way in which sensors are capturing that data, and what do we do with it? It's just the growth is just unbelievable. But what's the impact then, that we're seeing, and on the underlying infrastructure and the software that's driving that? And I think, if you look at, for example, predictions around storage, I mean, it ought to be obvious. If you're going to double the amount of data that you're holding, the amount of storage you're doing is going to grow as well. Is it going to double? No. I mean, the interesting thing is that if you look at storage projections over the next couple of years, through this year and onwards, you're looking at 20 to 25% growth in volumes of data, of data storage, which is sort of interesting if you're actually having twice that amount of new data being put. So it raises all sorts of questions about utilization of storage, etc. But I think what we're going to see is that after some years of sort of fairly flat revenue growth or revenue change figures for the storage environment, there's going to be real growth in storage again. And again, the thing to look out for is it's not necessarily all going to be, old-fashioned hard disks. You're looking at, flash, NAND, NVMe, all sorts of storage. So I think there's going to be quite an exciting year for anybody in data storage. And I certainly know from my focus on infrastructure, where I've seen storage as being somewhat boring in the last 10 or 15 years, actually the role that the physical underlying storage is going to play in terms of how we manage this data is going to be quite important. So I think you'll see some incredible growth, I think, in that area. I mean, just overarching before we even get into that is, the world is sort of fairly scary at the moment, and obviously doing these projections, there is a whole host of things that could come in and unstitch them. But the one thing that's fascinating when I was looking right across the industry was how many areas of technology are looking at double-digit growth in the coming year as we try and deal with various, challenges that are out there, both economic and technology challenges and societal challenges. It looks like certain areas of technology are going to grow very, very fast. Others will decline, but we'll come back to that. So from a data perspective, clearly physical storage is going to have an impact. But I think one of the other areas that are going to look at this is the whole area of data analytics, data streaming, all those things where we're starting to say, how do I make use of that data, and how do I move the data to the right, into the right applications and things, is that there will be a huge surge. Again, double digits. We're looking, at sort of streaming analytics potentially growing at something like a compound annual growth rate of 25% per annum over the next few years. So I think, as we get to that point, saying, right, I've got all this data, what do I do with it? So I think the growth of analytics and the growth of streaming analytics for real-time, analysis is going to be a real growth area during 2023 and beyond.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of you're right with that, and there's a lot of things that are sort of impacting that. Not just the kind of the consumer growth. And again, this was, I think, something we mentioned previously. as well. We've had this conversation where people don't seem to be distinguishing between sort of what data enterprises generate, whether that's kind of business data, machine data, or whatever, but also what consumers generate on social media platforms and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's, one of the challenges I think all the people who are doing projections face is that the consumerization of IT that we've seen over the last 15 to 20 years probably makes it quite difficult to differentiate between the two, and where people like Gartner are saying growth of, well, they started in October, they were projecting growth for IT of 5%. They've back just last month, they revised that downward a bit to 2.4% overall. That takes in the whole gamut of consumer and business IT, and it's really hard. And we've seen a sharp decline in PC sales recently, and that's likely. Projection is that will continue over the course. It's going to be a hard year for certainly desktop and probably even laptop manufacturers, I think. But it means it's an odd, a lot of the stuff that I'm looking at and talking about here, we're seeing huge growth, and yet others are clearly going to have a decline. So I think but you're right, it is quite difficult to distinguish between consumer and business in terms of putting this together. So just behind that, the other growth for me, I think, is the way in which we manage data. So I think areas like master data management is going to become absolutely critical. And again, projections there are a compound annual growth rate of something like 15% for master data management. And I think what you'll be seeing is the need to architect your data world far more seriously, perhaps, than you've done recently. I mean, the growth of the sort of underlying management technologies to get a control of your data environment, which leads to another sort of area of growth, I think, again driven by the data, and in fact affects a number, is automation. So I think we can see automation becoming absolutely critical. And I know you want to talk about RPA, robotic process automation. But I think generally the volume of data that's coming, whether you are in an IT ops environment, and you're being hit with this huge amount of data that you're having for observability or visibility of what's going on and performance of your IT infrastructure, through to, just business analytics, the amount of data being handled means it isn't possible for humans to do it at the speed we need to do it. It's that sort of issue. Therefore, automation is an absolute critical component, and therefore, any area of automation, whether it's in IT ops or whether it's in business process automation, is going to see significant double-digit growth, I think, in this coming year.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that, generally speaking, that whole space of how you deal with data, how you manage your data, whether it's kind of MDM or just generally speaking, we've talked about and mentioned things like data mesh and so on. So the growth is one side, the adoption is of the right sort of platforms and for your organization, and the consolidation as well as the management of data. I think all of those we've kind of grown organically quite a lot, and now it's actually time to do it properly. We've kind of done this sort of the jeans and t-shirts approach of it. Now it's kind of we need to be suited and booted and get that right.
Yeah, you're right. We need to do it properly. It's interesting because if you go back into the sort of mists of time, people got away from the idea that it was about the data, it was about information. And I know in my role in the NHS in the last decade, if I was to bring up the issue of we need a chief data officer, or we need better control of the data, or we need better data, they'd say, oh, we've got loads of data, we need information. And actually what they didn't realize at the time was that the quality of the data they'd got and the way it was architected was restricting their ability to get information out in the first place. You know, it was really interesting. They jumped straight to, we need information without thinking about the quality of the data. So I absolutely agree with you. I think that's going to, so I think anything that looks at, you know, master data management, you know, data mesh, all those sort of things are all going to be big growth areas, and you're going to see double-digit growth in that, I think, through the course of this year and beyond.
Yeah, I'm optimistic that enterprises are going to be leading on that, and not necessarily the industry or the vendors leading on that this year. I want to see the enterprise, and I'm optimistic that they will actually be driving the consumption of those things, and the acquisition of better strategies, implementation of better strategies around their data. So whether that is, as you said, you know, understanding the growth that they have of their data in their enterprise, how much data they're generating and accumulating, you know, implementing management platforms like data mesh or whatever around that sort of data to kind of govern it better and make it more available, and mine it in a take advantage of it in a better way than they're doing at the moment. I'd like to see a lot more of that this year. I'd like to see the enterprise actually taking responsibility a little bit, not just waiting for the vendors to come up with solutions and then they just kind of passively adopt those solutions.
I think what might drive this is a growing understanding. It's nascent at the moment, you know, of what is the value of my data. Now, given that we've changed from effectively a physical world to a virtual world, you know, and you can see it going in all sorts of directions with, you know, digital twins and or metaverse or whatever you think, is value will reside in the data you hold rather than the physical assets you've got. But how do you value that data? So I think you'll see that. I mean, I don't want to get into predictions rather than projections. But I think that might drive this, the projection is that sort of thinking, what you're just saying, will drive the enterprises, will drive users, and it will drive individual users too. We need to think about our own data. So, you know, that's a subject for probably a different rant. But, you know, when Tim Berners-Lee gets involved in those sort of things as well, we're going to see some, you know, interesting things happening. But that's moving into prediction territory. So I'll keep away from that.
Yes, that's been the plan for this August, to stay away from predictions. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, so from the final point from mine, you know, we've talked about automation, and almost inexorably there's a direct link then to artificial intelligence and machine learning. Again, because in order to drive the automation, you need some level of algorithmic, you know, I don't want to get into, you know, what's proper AI and what's proper ML at this stage, but the whole drive towards using algorithmic approaches, AI approaches to, you know, managing and analyzing and presenting possibilities for, you know, from that is something that's, again, absolutely critical. So again, I think you'll see, and I'm sure there are other areas for AI and ML in all sorts of places, but this, you know, huge growth in data and the need for automation will drive developments in AI and drive the AI marketplace quite hard.
Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit more as well. We'll have a little bit more chat about that. Now, you also had so the kind of the data sort of growth thing and so on is really interesting, and that's definitely something to for everybody really to be aware of.
Yeah. Sorry, and I was.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's a sort of final parting shot, maybe at the cloud native folks is, you know, the CNCF cloud trail has nothing on data. We need, you know, please will you go away and add something.
Think about that.
About data. But anyway, that was a little sort of side swipe at CNCF.
Well, they have the KubeCon event, I think, in Amsterdam in a few months. So hopefully we'll maybe we might do a live broadcast from there. Who knows? So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Okay. So the other one you wanted to pick on was around edge computing and things like that. Now, I don't know if you're, and this is my sort of, me sort of thinking about this, whether you wanted to just to talk about sort of, edge computing specifically, or a little bit more about sort of edge cloud, maybe. I don't know.
I wondered why you might say that. Yes.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That's me.
Edge cloud will come into that. I think,
Yeah.
first and foremost, it was a natural segue from data into edge computing.
Yeah, definitely.
Because obviously, the whole concept of edge computing now is that the compute goes to the data, not the data to the compute.
Right.
So actually, you're starting to put compute where the data is being generated, and obviously in IoT terms, that's getting further and further towards, call it the far edge if you must, but right out at, at the point of, where that data is captured. So I think what we will see growth in is and I was looking at, again, the sort of projections are for the whole edge compute market was, growth of over 20%, compound annual growth rates of 20% or so. So again, quite interesting. But the focus in the short term appears to be on hardware. And maybe this is where, and that will include sensors, and there's all sorts of issues around, management of that. But certainly lots of sensor people. But a lot of the focus is on the infrastructure you need to, from a compute perspective, out of the edge.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the growth is going to come in those, and then how do you manage that? Which is where the argument comes about cloud.
Right.
And I think there's no doubt that what we are starting to see, and will continue to see, is I'll go with it. I'll call it edge cloud because it is a virtualized, and I was talking to a company called Sunlight late last year, and they've got a platform that helps develop this sort of edge cloud type arena. And the one, it is cloud in everything but the sort of ultimate scalability immediately online, because clearly if you've got lots of equipment out, IT infrastructure out in remote locations, can I scale that very, very quickly? Well, nobody's going to put huge amounts of technology out in remote locations if they don't actually need it today.
Yeah.
But there are physical ways, really. I mean, basically, it's a sort of, they've got a logistics supply chain set up with people that says, I can actually put the new infrastructure in place, but because it's software defined, because it's virtualized, because it's, we absolutely understand what we're doing, we can do this very, very quickly. But in terms of management, you're remotely managing it as you would a remote cloud. Now, the question you and I argue about is, will the winners in this one be the hyperscalers? Will Outposts and Wavelength from AWS actually be what's put out there, or will you look at HP, buying Pisanto and having this sort of their Green Lake type approach, but actually play that right out to the edge. Or you look at the Sunlights of this world, who are sort of vendor agnostic in one sense, and say, actually, is that an alternative to going down, AWS everywhere or Azure everywhere, with Azure Stack? Again, we're into sort of predictions rather than projections there. The projection obviously is it's going to grow, and it's going to grow by 20%. Plus, it's strong growth. There's lots of new things happening and going on there that will, develop it at speed. And I always liken edge computing to that sort of environment that says, is the technology running ahead of the business's ability to do anything about it? Or is the business idea ahead of the technology's ability to deliver anything? And I think edge has been one of those ones where I think the ability of the technologies run ahead of businesses' ability to get their head around what they need as use cases.
Yeah, and is that, would you say that is specifically on that? Would you say that's on in vertical environments, in vertical sort of markets, that's fairly well understood, but in generally speaking, doing edge computing or edge cloud, it's not. Is that kind of how you're thinking about it?
No, I would have said it's almost the other way round.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it's certain verticals get it before others,
Okay.
and I think manufacturing, probably retail to an extent, are getting it quicker.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Because I just see that as being, you're going to do something. It's very specific. It's, you've got your IoT devices in a factory, or it's in a coal mine, whatever it is, type of stuff, and then you're doing something very specific for that, for that activity, for that business. Whereas the others are kind of, oh, we could do this at the edge. Okay, well, how would we do that? Oh, we need to write some apps, and we need to figure it out. And what do we shunt back, in terms of the metadata? And, that needs more time to work out and for the business to get their head around it. Whereas the manufacturer or the retailer, as you said, knows exactly what the type of data they want to extract. They just need the technology to be put into place.
Yeah, I think that's right. The tech, or the new technology, because obviously in manufacturing, what they call,
it's all new.
Well, no, in terms of manufacturing, OT, operational technology, machine control, has been around for some time.
And that's a kind of a closed loop, isn't it?
That's right.
About that as being a closed loop.
And there's some interesting discussions about, will we see a growth of 5G, for example, into that factory type environment, or will Wi-Fi 6 take, and again, what we're seeing is everybody wants to get involved. I'm not going to predict which one of those two wins out, but if you come back to the use cases for 5G were the ones that weren't being understood. The use cases for Wi-Fi were the ones that were being understood, because it was closed, as you say, it's more closed loop. It's in a tighter environment. 5G's taken a little while to get people to get their head around. I think the technology's been there ahead of the ability of people to think about, oh, I could do this. And you're looking at some of the agricultural things that are happening now, farming and areas, really interesting stuff going on. But that's taken a while for that to take off, because people just business didn't really get it, didn't understand what was happening, and I think that's changed. So I think you'll see, continued growth there, and you'll see, there's issues around security, which has got to be addressed. There's issues around standardization of protocols, etc., to make it move. So and with those out of the way, you would see it grow even faster. But again, we're talking 20 to 25% compound annual growth into the whole of the edge computing environment, which I think we're going to see, that and data, offset an awful lot of the sort of negative areas are going around technology at the moment, because of the problems out there. And a lot of we've talked about legacy debt, and there are areas that are going to decline quite sharply, but these sort of areas will grow very, very strongly indeed. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So a couple of projections there around sort of the growth of data and how we're going to cope with that, the impact of that, and then sort of the edge computing, how that's going to work out. Are we going to see more businesses kind of, adopting that and making use of that? Some interesting contrast between sort of the IoT side of it, devices sort of in the IoT space versus kind of maybe the processing, the server side of that. Being interesting, and the whole sort of whether people get it or not is still an ongoing thing.
It's still an ongoing thing, and of course it's another area where the consumerization angle, of course, had a big a lot of what we've seen so far has been consumer driven. It's been mobile phones, it's been the whole mobile issue. Conversely, they're probably the ones who are starting to suffer now in this environment, because of saturation of mobile devices, and obviously the impact on individual consumers going, I'm not going to spend that much. So I think the telcos have got some interesting challenges coming up in 2023.
As well as 5G, although that's probably a different subject, so we'll want sort of break into 5G and the sort of the implications of that and what that's going on. Anyway, okay, so let's move on to kind of one of the ones I wanted to talk about, which was the growth of the projected growth of public cloud. Now, you know, perhaps I'm, you know, seeing that that's based on various sort of circumstances that are, or situations that seem to be kind of, you know, upon us now, and maybe will, you know, will continue to be for the rest of this year. I don't think we're going to necessarily see sort of the wild extent of growth in you know, in public cloud specifically, as we've seen with previous years. I think with, you know, the pandemic years and so on, that sort of whole period has really helped to boost all of sort of IT in general, and the cloud specifically. But I don't think we're going to see that sort of, that, you know, the extent of the growth that we've seen of public cloud over the last few years. That doesn't mean it's not going to grow. I think it will still continue to grow. And obviously the analysts, you know, doom and gloom is always, you know, unfortunate when they say, oh, it didn't grow, you know, enough. But actually it did grow. It grew quite a lot. It just didn't kind of necessarily maybe meet their predictions or something. And again, there's that word again, predictions. So I think that my sort of projection of that for the year is that we're not going to see that sort of extent of growth that, you know, we have it, you know, that we've seen in the last few years.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's a bit like, you know, when they project about what's happening in the Chinese economy, and they say, you know, they're unhappy with 3% growth. You know, well, the UK would be absolutely delighted with 3%.
Exactly, yeah.
So I think there's an element of that going on. But, you know, you're still talking double-digit growth. I mean, projections are that infrastructure as a service will grow 14% this year. You know, but the challenge I think for them is not so much revenue, although it's slowing a little bit, is margin.
Yes.
I think that, you know, that leads on into, you know, with inflation the way it is, with some of the other headwinds, enterprises will be looking very hard. I know it's a topic close to your heart. You know, how do they optimize that environment? You know, so again, and therefore that will put pressure on margins. And we've seen all three of the big hyperscalers in their sort of, you know, quarterly reports highlighting the headwinds and talking about income coming down, you know, so, you know, certainly revenues slowing, but I think profit margins probably being, you know, under challenge. And of course, the other thing, people may be sitting there saying, well, you know, hold on a minute, Microsoft are going to just announce they're going to lay off 10,000 people. Amazon have been talking about large-scale layoffs. Google have been talking about layoffs too. And of course, what that hides is the fact that they've got very large businesses elsewhere that quite often are being supported by the margin growth within their cloud business. You know, and so if that comes under pressure, and they're getting pressures elsewhere, I mean, Amazon's, you know, as a retailer, rather than you know, their margins there are disappearing, you know, very, very rapidly. So I think let's not conflate problems at Amazon and Microsoft, you know, who've seen their PC revenue, you know, that decline sharply, with the cloud's not going to grow. It is going to grow, but it will come under pressure. And I know you want to talk a bit about that. Yeah.
I mean, somebody actually did that on LinkedIn. I'll try and include the link in the description about the you know, the redundancies, or some other people call it layoffs, in the IT industry. Actually, somebody did a chart on that for the recent, so that'll be an interesting one to show to the viewers. I mean, I think there's let's face it, I think despite all of the sort of this scaremongering of, you know, things like cloud repatriation, you know, repatriating workloads back from the cloud, and increasing costs, you know, we've seen that sort of obviously happen for various you know, due to other market forces, and outages. We mentioned outages, I think, in the December edition as well. I think, and as well as all the kind of the usual suspects that enterprises have to deal with every day, you know, security, sovereignty, you know, skills shortage, strategy of cloud, migration into cloud, you know, migrating your applications to cloud, and so on. That's kind of all the usual suspects. There is probably more, you know, pressures on this year, but I think despite all of that, I don't think, you know, I don't foresee many people kind of saying, well, that didn't work out. Let's just take it all back again. Take it all back into the data center. Go and get a new data center, lease the contract for 5 years, and bring it all back. Put it on, virtualization platforms, and go and buy a SAN, go and buy a Cisco switch. I don't think many people are going to do that. This kind of cloud repatriation, I think, is probably not a knee-jerk reaction to the cost, but more of a we tried it and we didn't do it very well. We didn't design it, so it's kind of really the problem has been with the initial design of the cloud migration that enterprise that particular organization did, or indeed that it wasn't there was no kind of strategy for it of kind of going into cloud. It was just kind of put some things, throw some workloads over the fence, and that's kind of cloud, for as far as they were concerned. So yeah, I don't see a lot of that happening. So I still, my projection is that the public cloud will continue to grow, as we said, not to the wild extents that maybe we've seen in the last few years. And yes, we mentioned the PC slump. I think IDC mentioned recently that the fourth quarter results for 2022 PC sales, not the server sales, but PC sales have kind of slumped back to pre-pandemic sort of levels. I think there's an article on that in the on the register, so I'll include that. And it said the PC boom is over. So we are seeing that. We are seeing that sort of that growth that we had over the sort of the pandemic years and so on. It's kind of really slowing down. We've had more pressures like cost management and cost optimization and so on. We've had external pressures as well from just conflicts and energy prices going up and things like that. So all of that will bear down, I think, on the growth for this year. But still, I don't see it like a rejection, a kind of a repulsing of those sort of projects. I think they'll continue, but they just won't be. They'll be more conservative and maybe even well thought out, even more thought out than they are at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. IT, I think, probably during the pandemic was seen as the savior of many businesses. Either from the
it was definitely
work from home point of view, or the fact that realization that how much of business could be put online. How much could go truly digital, and so I think there's been some, and I don't think that'll change. So again, I'm with you on that one. I think there are some responsibilities, I think, for the cloud providers themselves to look at the transparency of their and the way in which they price. And I think that's been part of the issue. The rest is, as I say, around being more effective, getting a broader sense of optimization across the piece, better architected, all those sort of questions. But I don't think company boards, enterprise boards will be stepping back and saying, no, it's almost like, the CIO is no longer the key element that he has been in the last few years, and relegating him to being under the CFO again, which is sort of where life was. I don't think it's going to be a backward step to that. No. I think it's seen as a so yes, cloud in all its forms, and of course the other driver in most industries, probably apart from parts of financial services, there is no desire to increase the amount of assets they have. They're trying to reduce their risk through owning assets, and that's a big move away. Even in financial services always was no, we need the assets because it helps us with our not liquidity, but the ratios that they get, on their ability to lend is based on their asset base. So they didn't want stuff off the balance sheet, but I think most companies do want stuff off the balance sheet. So I think it'll carry on.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so on to the tech projections that I had lined up as well. So the first of those tech projections is around GitOps. Now, I think we've already mentioned GitOps. I've mentioned it maybe once or twice already. I've certainly mentioned it in other talks that I've done as well. I think that there's going to be definitely I mean, GitOps is on the rise. We've seen that the kind of some of the projects that have been around in that space that work specifically like Argo CD and so on, those have all matured. They've all graduated from the CNCF project list. So I definitely see that not necessarily becoming sort of dominant, but certainly becoming more important. Now, the implications for that is kind of where maybe sort of Kubernetes was in the first few years of its life. That's kind of really where GitOps is. And maybe, towards the end of this year, and then next year will maybe be the the year of GitOps 2024. But for 2023, it's certainly a growth space. We'll maybe see more solutions, more platforms, apart from sort of Argo CD and what have you, in that space. So we'll see a little bit more growth maybe in that. And then the implications of that, the impact is where does it fit in with things like DevOps and automation through infrastructure as code and things like that? Because it has kind of a sort of an overlap in those spaces. So I'm really interested to see how DevOps, DevSecOps, but specifically DevOps vendors, how they're going to really react to that, whether they will adopt things, one of these GitOps, open source platforms, whether they'll go and buy and they'll go and acquire an existing company that's, specializing in that sort of GitOps space. I don't know. So we might see some of that sort of thing happening for this year. But I certainly see GitOps sort of encroaching on that DevOps space, making people think, how they do their infrastructure, how do they maintain the validity of that infrastructure that they have built in the cloud. And GitOps is really there to, designed to do that. So we won't kind of go into the sort of definitions of GitOps or why GitOps and advantages and so on, but I certainly see it as a technology kind of growing in that space.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of pressure on providing levels of observability about what's going on in both the development and also the IT operations space, and I see more and more that more and more focus, and there are vendors starting to look at how do I link that back to the business outcomes, and I think you get those sort of drivers will mean there's more space. I mean, interestingly, you talk about GitOps or vendors or DevOps vendors, and I think I've always seen DevOps particularly, but the whole sort of space, as being a very large part is about culture. And I think it's a cultural thing, that's because quite often the tool sets are quite diverse and not necessarily that it's not as if we can say, hey, there's vendor XYZ is going to go from this space, this revenue is going to see this many revenue growth. Because it is a large amount of that is about a mindset, and again, you're seeing that sort of mindset of platform engineering, bringing teams together to try and really make that culture stick. Yeah. And GitOps has a huge part to play in that, I think, in terms of that, and the overlap then into IT operations and is important. So I agree with you. I think it's a year of potential growth for GitOps and the GitOps community. And obviously being accepted as part of the mainstream DevOps environment.
Yeah, so it's definitely a year of. I mean, people say it's kind of graduated and so on, as these tools have graduated as projects. That's fine, but obviously there's still they still need to mature. But this is kind of getting to that level of maturity where both enterprises and the vendors who are working in that space really need to sit up and pay attention to see how they can bring in these sort of GitOps technologies into the existing practices they have, or the existing, in the case of vendors, the existing platforms that they have at the moment.
And I think the pressure is on as we make this very complex world that we've managed to put together in the IT space. Yes, it's fast moving, it's microservice based, it's container based, we can do far more quickly. But the downside has been actually we've created quite a technically complex environment.
Complexity
things like GitOps are helping to provide a level of assurance that actually what you put out into production is going to work.
Exactly.
you know, so I think, yeah, I agree with you. I think GitOps has got a big year ahead of it.
Indeed. Okay, so the other one is BPPF. So BPF. I should getting the acronym wrong already. So Berkeley Packet Filter. So Berkeley Packet Filter is really a technology which is part of sort of things like the Linux kernel and Windows apparently as well. I didn't know it was in Windows. I now know that as well, part of my research. And it's grabbing raw data from that sort of data link layer, that sort of layer 2, of the OSI model in terms of the networking. And the idea, and eBPF is kind of an extension of that, which allows us to be able to run processes, in kind of in the privileged mode of Linux, for example, to be able to filter for certain types of packets. Now, whether you kind of set your connectivity or networking into kind of a promiscuous mode, as it's called, and to be able to kind of receive all packets, even if they're not kind of designed for your particular destination or not, as the case may be. The important thing is that we kind of are able to tease out from that using that sort of filter process that we're running, and we're talking to the kernel. We're able to actually filter for certain types of traffic, networking traffic. So we're kind of sniffing that sort of network traffic to see certain packets and certain activities, and that would include things around sort of generally around network packets or network information, sort of security based information as well on packets, as well as those may be having a further impact on some other aspects of how we do our sort of cloud computing as well. So things like service mesh is also part of that process. So eBPF is that technology is kind of already built into the operating systems, and we're able to take advantage of that using things like sort of a privileged mode process where we can filter for certain types of network traffic, and that allows us to monitor the networking traffic that we want. That allows us to look at the security aspect of that, as well as be able to on a more sort of application or container level work on or produce things like around management of a service mesh, or the creation of a service mesh. So this has a huge impact, I think, in terms of how we do, for example, a service mesh. At the moment, we have kind of sidecars. We're in the business of doing sidecars in our service mesh, in our sort of container environment, and those sidecar containers sit next to the service containers, whatever application or service that you're running in a container, and kind of do all the networking at that sort of service mesh layer, so to speak. So all the containers are communicating at that layer, not having to kind of do north or south sort of traffic, kind of east-west traffic in terms of the communication. So there are tools obviously in that space that do that sort of, or work as a sidecar. So things like Linkerd and Istio, whatever, those are all sort of service mesh solutions. But eBPF is kind of offering the kind of the tantalizing idea of having to do that at an earlier stage without the need for putting these sidecars into your service mesh. So you're still achieving a service mesh, it's just being done in a different way. Effectively, it's architecturally different. So that kind of negates the need for these sort of sidecars. So I see that as something that's coming in now. In terms of, we talked about networking, security, and service mesh. So we've, the service mesh, I think, impact is fairly obvious. Networking, not so much, because I don't know where the vendors are on that. I don't know if they're want to take advantage of that.
It's an interesting one, because I think most network performance management vendors would say we've been able to monitor packet traffic for a long time. In fact, if you talk about them, we've had this conversation earlier last year. They said they actually get quite upset about the observability term. They have a very specific sense that when they're looking at packets, they're looking at what they call observed data,
Yeah.
not something that you've actually set up as a log. What do you put into the event log? It's not log traffic, it's real observed data. They've been doing that for some time, but a lot of it maybe is quite proprietorial, proprietary based. And therefore, if they can do this so I think there's a whole general move towards, an open approach. And if eBPF sits in with things like open telemetry, then I think it will be adopted quite quickly. We've seen a very, very sharp rise in quite traditional vendors having to go and start to look at how they adapt to the whole open telemetry, open approach, open API approach. So I think there's the other benefit, and I think if you combine the security angle with the observability angle, then I think real benefit. But there must be a potential performance benefit if you're doing it at layer 2 rather than having to add sidecars and any performance gain that you can make, but also securing at a lower level of the OSI stack, then it's got to be beneficial moving forward. But it'll be interesting to see. It's I don't know what your view is. I mean, I'm not well up on eBPF, but it looks like it's generating a lot of interest. But we're at that very early stage, I think, of it getting any sort of mainstream adoption. Be interesting to see how it grows this year. I think it will grow, but
I mean, I think that networking is quite a number of subtle layers there. So whereas we've talked about, and I've kind of coined terms like cloud network management, with the Aviatrix of the world and sort of Cisco, more established place like Cisco and so on, being in that space. They kind of look at it from that sort of wider scheme, whether it's actually using hardware, whether it's using, whether it's in the cloud. Whereas I think eBPF is kind of more focused on your sort of, part of the world for networking and so on. But it also has, like I said, the impact of security. So how you do your security as well. So presumably, and I'm not an expert on eBPF, although I will mention the company iSurveillance. I'll be hopefully doing a series of talks with iSurveillance fairly shortly around their Sicilian platform, which is their solution in eBPF. So there is a difference there, I think, between kind of general packet sort of sniffing and so on, which is what the likes of, I think, Aviatrix, Cisco, people like that do, and some of the other companies that you've mentioned. Whereas this is kind of more focused around the sort of your cloud environment, maybe what's happening within your, service mesh, whatever that's sitting in a, Kubernetes cluster, whatever it happens to be. So again, I'm not an expert on that, but hopefully we'll get a little bit more clarification for our viewers around that, in future talks, and hopefully we'll do a short series on that with iSurveillance as well. But certainly that space, I think, I mentioned cloud network management, CNM, in the past, and I think eBPF is actually one of the pillars of that, is what I would call kind of cloud network management. So we need to start taking, I think I emphasized last time that we need to start taking networking in the cloud more seriously, and I think this is the way to do it, not just kind of bolt something on like sidecars and things like that just to make it work, basically.
I think we've talked about the past that almost we went away as an industry from thinking that we needed to think about our network architecture when we went to the cloud. And the reality is you need to think even more about particularly if you're going to use multi-cloud, particularly if you're doing a hybrid cloud environment. And very few organizations will live without having to network either in the public cloud or the public internet, I make a sort of subtle distinction between the two, and that this is going to become an important element of what they need to think about.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so let's move on to the third tech projection. So we've had GitOps, we've had eBPF, and the other one is kind of the integration of sort of AI and ML, into more sort of the consumer level. Really, we've kind of talked about a little bit about sort of data and data science and stuff like that. It's kind of been very specific, but kind of in that sort of consumer space, the street sort of space, it's been a little bit more inaccessible, at least not directly accessible. It's been kind of a little bit more sort of distant. But with the advent of things like ChatGPT, I'm not going to go into the details of ChatGPT, General Pre-trained Transformer, I believe is the term. There's tons of people have already done that on YouTube and LinkedIn, so I'm not going to get into that. But having that sort of trending and becoming more, consumer accessible, is, I think, is a really good, is a good idea. And having the capability of that is, going to be, projecting forward, is going to be, an example of how you can do that really for consumers. We've seen obviously Microsoft's investing in OpenAI, the producers of ChatGPT, sort of a couple of weeks ago, last week or a couple of weeks ago. And then, I don't know, maybe we'll see more ChatGPT-like platforms this year. There'll be more kind of competing platforms. We don't know if, kind of what Google's going to do. There was a lot of talk about sort of ChatGPTs. So not really a term that flows off the tongue. Yeah, exactly. ChatGPT's kind of impact on, on Google search and things like that. So who knows? But interesting, I saw a LinkedIn post the other day, and it said, and I'll add this to the description, and somebody actually asked ChatGPT what is its prediction for 2023 of things happening. What's going to be the biggest thing happening in the DevOps space? And ChatGPT actually said GitOps is going to be the biggest thing in the DevOps space. So ChatGPT agrees with me, which is quite cool. And the what it actually said is, and I quote, "It looks like the next big thing is going to be a focus on GitOps, a Git-centric approach to managing infrastructure and application deployments. This approach allows for more efficient and automated deployment processes, as well as improved collaboration and visibility within teams," unquote.
Wow.
There you go. So ChatGPT agrees.
End of story.
And I didn't ask ChatGPT to give me that prediction, by the way. I'd actually predicted GitOps was going to, because we mentioned it in a previous class.
It's probably just as well that I'm old enough not to be worried that it's getting rid of me as an analyst.
Yes. The other one which I saw, and I hope to find the link to it, was somebody was talking about lawyers and law, and kind of how and I actually did a prediction in that case, and I said, well, we'll probably end up with two-tier law. One which it's a chat bot that you're talking to. You'll have representing you, and then the other one will be actually a real life person representing you. So anyway, I'll try and find the link to that one as well. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just no, go ahead. I was just going to say something else, but go ahead.
No, I think the whole of that sort of AI space has tremendous potential. From a projection point of view, it's bound to grow. How far it grows, and ChatGPT, God, my teeth will fall out trying to say that. They need to change the name. But that sort of approach is absolutely fundamental to improving the customer experience, the digital experience, I think, that we're all getting.
Yeah. And also, I think just the final point on that for me is, this is why I said it's kind of, this ChatGPT has exploded and is exploding very much because we've not had accessibility to this. We've talked about AI and ML. Lots of people have implemented it. Sure, we've talked about it in AI ops and things like that. Great. So from a, enterprise point of view, running server applications, all that kind of, but not from a client, and a consumer aspect of it. This is the first time when you can just register online, give up your telephone name, telephone number, if that's what you want to do, because it does ask you for your telephone number. So if you're registering for ChatGPT, you will need to do that. And then you got access to this thing, and it will just ask it whatever you want, copy and paste any content, get some ideas of what you want to do, say, write, record video, whatever it is you're doing, basically. And I think that's really something that people have not had, consumer sort of aspect of it, and just general public has not had really access to that in the past.
And I think a sort of shout out to the underlying technology, but also the infrastructure, in the sense that it's coming together in terms of the ability to drive far more computation at a much, much lower level. I mean, we're talking about putting AI out at the edge.
Yeah.
So I think infrastructure's come together that's enabled you to do it. The cloud companies, so you can actually now train your AI models in the cloud rather than having to spend money on doing it in-house, because that wasn't possible before. Various you think of the accelerators are out there, but also the way the networks have changed. Everything's sort of come together. It's sort of a perfect sort of merging of technology and knowledge and understanding and requirement. As you say, that consumer one that says the current chatbot interaction is limiting, to put it mildly.
Yes.
And if we can get beyond that, I think it will open up a load of possibilities.
I agree. So very briefly, on the last of the projections, the third of the projections I had was around cloud optimization. Now, there's a lot of kind of splinters of this. We've got things like cloud cost optimization. We've got FinOps. Got very specific focuses around sort of Kubernetes cost management, so things like KubeCost and various other ones. There's kind of an element and overlap with sustainability because it has a direct impact on sustainability. I'm just kind of really calling it cloud optimization for now, and that could include any and all of those sort of activities and terms within that. So you could say we're doing cloud cost optimization specifically. We're kind of stepping back maybe in using a FinOps framework and governance approach. We could be targeting Kubernetes clusters. That's fine. So we do kind of KubeCost stuff. Or it might, we're doing it because there's something else going on over there around sustainability. So this kind of contributes to that. But this whole space is, I think, definitely going to be projecting that into this year is definitely going to be on the minds of a lot of enterprises. I think we talked previously, and I've mentioned this in other videos as well, where there was a little bit the last reInvent. There was a little. Oh yes, it was at the AWS Fest, the last one that I did. I think in December. There was the AWS reInvent last year. There was some pushback from customers and enterprises around cost management, because I think again AWS did do that. They kind of mentioned cost optimization and things like that for cloud, but it wasn't kind of a thematic sort of thing. I didn't really get that a lot from Werner Vogel's talk, his kind of intro to AWS reInvent, and I think there was a couple of articles that I picked up on, and I think I have included them in past talks, where customers were saying, well, actually, come 2023, we're going to double down on the cost for cloud, and we're gonna want to renegotiate our contracts with our hyperscaler, with our public cloud provider, and things like that to kind of make it more cost efficient and so on. So this whole, I think, space is going to be a big focus for enterprises for this year. What's your take on that, Paul?
I think it will be a big focus. This is more a hope than an expectation, is that enterprises, and particularly any procurement departments in enterprises, focus on value rather than just cost. Because I think it's quite easy in cost optimization to say, reduce this, reduce that. You look at cloud enables you to do an awful lot more at the same price. And one thing that, or you do an awful lot more and it costs a bit more, but not nearly as much as if you tried to do it in-house. Yeah. And I think there's a lack of, there needs to be an understanding that it needs to be value-based as well as just straight cost-based. But I agree with you, there will be a huge focus, with all the price pressures and cost pressures that are coming because of the current, global macroeconomic environment. It is bound to have a level of focus on it. But I think this idea of a broader optimization, piece, rather than just to focus on, the cost of each service. I think there needs to be a much. So, but yes, I mean, you're seeing lots of vendors coming into the marketplace for cloud cost optimization, telling a FinOps story, but they're talking cloud cost optimization. Some of it is related to the migration path and being effective in the use of cloud, but quite a lot of it is literally giving you the ability to manage. And this is where it's disappointment, in fact, if an AWS is still not focused on it, is how do you navigate quite a complex pricing environment and consumption environment in a large-scale AWS deployment. It's too easy for it to run out of control. Never mind not switching server instances off or storage instances off when you don't need them. The actual cost structures have grown topsy, and actually, the hyperscalers need to deal with that. So it will be focused.
Yeah, hopefully, again, I'll be trying to focus on that on some topics coming up in the future on the channel as well. I think I've got something lined up with at least one vendor in that space, so it'll be interesting to see that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it. I think that we've come to the end of the rant for this month. Those are our projections for the year. Hope you guys have found this useful and interesting. No doubt we could go on talking about it forever, but I'd love to I'd love to hear your projections, and feel free to to tell me about sort of your ideas for the rest of the year. Drop in some comments and let me know what you think. Would love to hear from you. I will try and include as many of the links of all the things that we've discussed as I can in the description of the video. I want to thank Paul again for his time and his excellent insights as always. Thank you, Paul, again for being sporty. That's it, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.